Welcome back to my Well of Ascension video. That was bad. All right. So I'm just going to do like spoiler free for the first half of the video and then spoilers in the second half. Also, throughout the video, I basically have to give spoilers for the first book, right? Because, yeah, if you've read it, you'd know. But, like, I'd recommend the first book. Go read the first book. And then you can come back to this video. Now, with all that out of the way, man, this book was great. Let's talk about the plot. So, like the first book, this book is separated into 5 parts. The first part, definitely the weakest. I think of the 10 parts I've read, the first part of this book is the worst of all of them. Not to say it's bad. Like, again, I rated the first book 5 stars, and this book I love a lot too, but it's just like too slow for me. And there's like some things that happen, but they feel very low stakes to me. Like, so like, let's say Vin gets into a fight in the first part of this book. You know, like Vin's not going to die in the first 50 pages of the book, right? so like if she's in like 5 fights or whatever, just like doing sparring and stuff, you know, it just feels like it doesn't matter. As you keep reading, the book just gets better and better. The plot gets more and more high stakes. Parts 4 and 5 of this book are better than parts 4 and 5 of the first book. And again, loved the first book. The first book ended great. This book is even better than that. Definitely like the plot twists. You just get hit by like 4 in a row, it feels like. And even though I'm like, I had my good old conspiracy hat on for one of the plot twists and was on to it right away, but I was still like bombarded with all these other ones, and I thought I was so clever for like knowing one of them, but you can't predict what happens in this book. You just can't do it. But when you read and figure out what does happen, you're like, oh man, that's great. That makes so much sense. I love that. And that's where Sanderson is just a great writer. The plot twist connecting with like the rest of the things in the world and the characters in the world itself. All right, so characters. In my last review, I gave Vin like the highest praise. I'm like, she's the best character I've ever read, maybe, but probably. In this, she's still like top tier, but there were 2 things, which I'll talk more about in spoilers. I can't really talk about it, but I was like, I'm not sure if I agree with Vin doing this in this way, but they're fairly nitpicky. Vin's still amazing. The side characters, like, they have to take a step up, obviously, because Kelsier is not alive, so that means we've got to talk about more characters. Elend and Sazed and, you know, Breeze, Ham. Whenever I follow any of them, I just love their different perspectives. The antagonists are good. There's definitely multiple antagonists. There's no one really well fleshed out antagonist. I know some people like when there's just one great villain, but when there's this sort of power vacuum that the first book kind of leaves us with, it doesn't make sense for there to be one uniting villain right away after that like unites all the dominances. It's kind of got to be like this political drama power struggle with this faction, maybe like they'll do it, or like maybe this faction will do it, and that's where a lot of the tension comes from. The magic system is still great, the world building still great, culture and all that still great, and then the way they all intersect with each other still great. It builds well off of what everything from the first book started. It is pretty crazy that I'm on board with every little addition to the magic system, the culture, and all that. It speaks very highly of Sanderson, because usually I will find something to nitpick. Speaking of nitpicking, we're getting into the spoiler section of the review now, so if you don't want spoilers, definitely click off, because man, I want to talk about this book. All right, so my 2 problems with Vin. When this book starts, Vin does not have a good relationship with Osier, and Vin is now the master / contract holder of Oseer. And I know Vin's like not super trusting or whatever, but I feel like they would have developed a better bond. And I love the whole Oseer getting taken over by another Kandra. That was a great plot twist. And I'm not saying Vin should recognize when that happens. I just think Vin's level of trust of Oseer and like the amount of conversations her and Elend have about it, and like her and Doxson, and all these like random pages devoted to their sort of like mistrust of each other, I felt like they were kind of unneeded. And it would have kind of sped up the pacing of the first part of the book. Like, you can talk about it. I feel like it was just talked about maybe a bit too much, and Vin's mistrust of Oseer was weirdly too high. I feel like Vin should have been able to trust Oseer a bit more. If anything, Oseer not trusting Vin would have been the trust dynamic that would have made more sense for me if Sanderson had wrote about. But I feel like Vin should have just been kind of neutral, more neutral at the start on Oseer rather than super mistrusting. Okay, and then second slight, very nitpicky issue I had with Vin was she almost went like with the random Misborn on like this huge side quest journey. What? That would have been so random. And like that dude was like so, I don't know, creepy, like weird, clearly a spy, clearly not aligned with her. Like, oh my god. It would have been ridiculous if she had gone. And Sanderson made that weird situation make as much sense as like that ridiculous situation could possibly make. You know, like the logic of like, well, like if we both go, then neither side has a Misborn, so that's makes everything make sense. And sure, you know, but and then Vin ultimately not going was like great. So it's great that it didn't ruin the plot, but it makes Vin go from, in my mind, to best character ever to like a slight step down from that. So yeah, that's like every possible nitpick I have. Very small complaints. The good things are, I can't even put into words how good the good things in this book are. Let's start with the Kandra. Love the Kandra. I want to find out what happens to Tenebrin, or whatever his name was. Basically the guy who was impersonating Oseer. Those giant dudes were a great sort of brutish, villainous, you know, total wild card to add to this standoff that was already going on between the three armies. And, you know, their culture's interesting, too. It seems like they were created by the Lord Ruler, similar to the Kandra. So, yeah, very interesting to see what goes on with them. Elend's dad and, like, his half-brother, strong antagonists. And the thing I knew about was that Elend's father's servant or whatever, I was like, she's definitely the one poisoning him. I'm like, I don't trust her. And honestly, like, she should poison him. He's a horrible dude. Straff deserves to get poisoned, which kind of makes him a good antagonist. He's like the main antagonist of the whole book, which is a little weird. He's kind of like a weak main antagonist, but with all like the crazy stuff going on, again, you don't really need like this huge, awesome supervillain. The looming ash falling from the sky more throughout the book, and the mist. Oh man, you know, it's almost like gives like a Stephen King-ish vibe. I could gush about basically everything in this book. It's just so good, so well done. I love it. And I forget his name, but Elend's half-brother having spikes in him. Did he die? Like, they left his body, but like, you know, Steel Inquisitors live through all this like random insane stuff, and there wasn't a section where it's like, oh, they like went back and found his body or whatever. This dude might be alive, but like maybe it was just like a weird little oversight from Sanderson of I don't know. Anyway, Breeze having PTSD at the end, like great to add this sort of like mental health angle. It just like those like little touches are like the cherry on top to make it just more realistic. Also, I hear that Ham and Doxson might be like women, which I found out about halfway through the book. They like might be like women in like a screenplay, which, you know, I don't really think that changes them as characters. I think they're still good characters. Club's dying, little heartbreaks there. Elend becoming emperor, I feel like it has to be done. Or at least like the full commander-in-chief of the armies and military and those important decisions. You kind of need that one person in this situation to lead the military tactics part of all this. And like the slight little antagonist that Sanders sprinkles in. Like this chapter, there's a merchant who made a deal with Set. And the merchant's in the Senate, and it's like they got all these votes and voted Elend out. And it's great. I love it. And yeah, like the whole like part 2 and 3 of like the 3-army standoff, and that definitely adds like a more specific political intrigue, like, or explicit threat of military involvement to this book. Whereas the first book had the sort of like soft consequences of, you know, normal politicking of like weird alliances behind the scenes that might lead to something. And I usually like that first book sort of politics a bit better, but the military like 3-way standoff in Well of Ascension is great, so I do like it. But for me, I think that might put it just a hair below the first book. And it just being like longer, you know, I'm fine with long books, but it was just a very slow start for a second book in a sequel. It's very weird that the first book felt like it started faster to me. And I don't know, maybe it's just like a slight thing holding it back in my head. But still, like, I have to give Well of Ascension 5 stars. It was just so good. Especially because it has like these middle book villains that like aren't like that big of a deal. Stuff that like I wouldn't expect to love necessarily as much as I did in this book. So anyway, yeah, just keep reading the series. I'm super excited to read the last book. I'll try to get that review up late this week. Hopefully. We'll see. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. Well of Ascension. Man, my outros are getting worse. Anyway, bye.